theological or doctrinal perspective that God would ever command polygamy, how do you then reconcile, if you're still a believer in Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon, Nephi slaying Laban in the Book of Mormon? Isn't murder worse than polygamy?
Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores church history and the church's truth claims.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So this is going to be a shorter video, and this is going to be an honest question that I have to the growing movement that deny that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy, and also try to advocate that polygamy is always considered an abomination, a whoredom. It's always condemned in scripture, and therefore there's no doctrinal or theological justification that God could ever command prophet to practice polygamy. So setting aside the historical question of whether or not Joseph Smith did practice polygamy or not, I do feel that the historical evidence and data is very strong to support that Joseph Smith did in fact practice polygamy in a secret and confidential way. Whether or not you want to view Joseph Smith as a prophet who was commanded of God, as a pious fraud, or as a libido-driven sexual predator, I do find the evidence quite strong that he did practice polygamy, and I thought Jacob outlined some very strong historical arguments in his debate with Jacob Isbell. But one of the main arguments against polygamy, and that I hear that a lot of the deniers that Joseph practiced polygamy and polygamy being commanded of God, is that it's always considered this abomination in scripture, and that there's just no way that God could command it. And disclaimer here, I am not an advocate of polygamy. I have definitely struggled over polygamy, the doctrine, and also the historical practice as well. It's not something that is a doctrine or a practice that I like. And now we do see polygamy being practiced and condoned in the Old Testament. Prophets and patriarchs like Abraham, Jacob, Moses, David, Solomon, all having more than one wife. Now, I do agree that there's nowhere where it's explicitly commanded, and it seems to have been a cultural practice. And there was, under the law of Moses, levirate marriage, that if a man dies, his brother could marry his wife. But just because polygamy is condoned in the Old Testament doesn't necessarily mean it's right. I don't think that's the strongest argument to make, because there's also slavery or rape or genocide in the Old Testament, which we would view as problematic things of the culture. So saying that, oh, well, God is fine with it and that God could later command it because it's never condemned and because it's condoned, I don't think it's the strongest argument. But certainly the house of Israel was built off of polygamy, and Abraham and Jacob don't seem to be condemned anywhere in the Bible or in the Book of Mormon for their practice of polygamy. For David and Solomon, there is in Jacob too, and people have often pointed that as a contradiction with Doctrine and Covenants 132. I think you can definitely see with David's practice of polygamy, it led him to commit adultery with Bathsheba, to lust, and to kill her husband Uriah. So it led to adultery and murder in his case. And with Solomon marrying lots of women who worshipped other gods and sort of took him away from worshipping Yahweh. Now, there is the verse in Samuel where Nathan says to David after his adultery with Bathsheba that the Lord had given him his master's wives. But I know you could say that that is just a figure of speech or language that, well, we receive everything from God. So it's not God authorizing or being okay with his practice of polygamy. And although other than Doctrine and Covenants 132 and the levirate marriage in the law of Moses, there's nowhere where it's commanded in scripture, and it does appear to be condemned in Jacob chapter 2, for the Nephites trying to justify themselves in wickedness and whoredoms and having many wives and concubines. Now, we can quibble over the verse 30, if it's a loophole or not, where it says, "For if I will, saith the Lord of hosts, raise up seed unto me, I will command my people, otherwise they shall hearken unto these things." I personally interpret it as it's saying that if I will, thus saith the Lord, command my people to raise a righteous seed, which is one of the reasons given in Doctrine and Covenants 132, that he'll command his people to practice polygamy, but otherwise they're to hearken unto monogamy. Now, people might also interpret that scripture differently based upon the context, and that's fine. And I'm not necessarily trying to scripturally justify the command or the doctrine of polygamy, although there's evidence of past prophets practicing it. But is it possible that God could command polygamy? Or is that just something that God could never do. And I hear the polygamy deniers saying that polygamy, it's always an abomination, it's always condemned, it's always a whoredom. But I have a question. Setting aside Abraham and Jacob and Moses and those prophets who practiced polygamy in the Bible, who don't seem to be condemned, and the house of Israel really seems to be built off this practice of polygamy. I think we would all agree that murder or killing somebody is a much more serious crime and serious sin than polygamy. And as far as I'm aware, most of these people who are still polygamy deniers still believe in the Book of Mormon and in Joseph Smith, which is, I think, good in a way. But I feel like they're highly critical of polygamy. But then, if you believe in the Ten Commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," how do you reconcile then Nephi being commanded to slay Laban? As I read the account, and you can look at it cynically, you could say that, hold on, Nephi broke 3 of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. Nephi is commanded to go get the brass plates, to take the brass plates from Laban, so you could say he was stealing. After he slayed and killed Laban, "Thou shalt not kill," he then put on his clothes and then spoke with a disguised voice to sound like Laban to his servant. You could say there that he's breaking 3 of the 10 Commandments. But believers in the Book of Mormon view it that this was for a higher and more righteous purpose, that Nephi was commanded of God to get the brass plates for the purpose for him and his seed to not dwindle in unbelief, that they would have the law, the commandments, the words of prophets, and that he was commanded and led by the Spirit to do so. This definitely being an exception to the rule. And above all, we would believe that Nephi did not sin because he was obedient and commanded of God. And there's likely other examples in scripture, such as Abraham being told to lie about Sarah being his wife. Now, polygamy is not as bad in my mind as murder or killing somebody. And I think that we can find this supported in scripture and the words of prophets, and also just like how you would be punished today in court. Now, if you're a non-believer who rejects polygamy and doesn't believe that God would ever command polygamy, but you also don't believe in the Book of Mormon and you don't believe God would have commanded Nephi to slay Laban, that's fine, that's fair enough. At least you're being intellectually consistent. But what I don't get is, how can you say that polygamy itself is an abomination and that God, it's always condemned and God could never command it, even though there's scriptural precedent for it being practiced by past prophets, but then say God permitted and commanded Nephi to slay Laban? And his killing of Laban, it wasn't an act of war, it wasn't self-defense. So if God permitted and commanded Nephi to slay Laban and take the brass plates for a higher and righteous purpose, is it not possible that God could have commanded Joseph to practice polygamy and restored it again for a higher and righteous purpose? Or are we to believe that it's okay for God to make exceptions when it comes to murdering people and Nephi slaying Laban, but not in commanding polygamy? Because isn't murder, isn't that worse than polygamy? No, I'm not saying, oh, because if God permitted or commanded Nephi to slay Laban in the Book of Mormon, it's a non sequitur to say, oh, well, therefore he did the same when he commanded Joseph to practice polygamy. And I'm not even saying that this means that polygamy was commanded of God and was inspired. You could still take the view of false prophet or fallen prophet or just a con man. But I feel if they're going to make the arguments that there's no way from a theological or doctrinal perspective that God would ever command polygamy, how do you then reconcile, if you're still a believer in Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon, Nephi slaying Laban in the Book of Mormon? And if you're going to say, well, that was for a higher, more righteous purpose, couldn't it have been the same with Joseph Smith in restoring polygamy? And if you can reconcile Nephi slaying Laban, but view polygamy as this heinous crime and abomination, isn't murder worse than polygamy? And if it's possible that God justified and commanded that, couldn't he have done the same with polygamy with Joseph Smith? Interested in their thoughts and people's thoughts. Again, this is a huge movement, it's a huge debate. And again, I really do struggle and empathize with those people who have issues with polygamy, who struggle with the doctrine, who struggle with the historical practice. I think it's really normal to feel that way. However, I also don't think it's fully fair to just really attack polygamy but then say, like, turn a blind eye to Nephi slaying Laban in the Book of Mormon or genocide in the Old Testament, which to me are far greater and more heinous things to have to wrestle with. My thoughts. Interested what people's thoughts are in the comments as well. And I'll see you next time on Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.